The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has become a defining event of our time. It's a tragedy that has resulted in immense suffering and loss of life. It has also sparked a global debate about responsibility, with different sides offering contrasting narratives. This essay delves into the heart of this debate, seeking to answer the question, who's to blame for the Russia-Ukraine conflict? We will examine the historical context, geopolitical factors, and the actions of key players. Through careful analysis, we aim to shed light on the complexities of this conflict. Our exploration will take the form of a debate, with arguments presented from opposing perspectives. This approach allows for a balanced examination of the evidence. It also encourages critical thinking about the narratives surrounding the conflict. On one side, some argue that NATO's expansion eastward provoked Russia into invading Ukraine. They contend that Russia's actions were a response to legitimate security concerns. On the other side, some assert that Russia is solely to blame for the invasion of Ukraine. They argue that Russia's actions were an unprovoked act of aggression, a violation of international law and Ukraine's sovereignty. The stakes in this debate are incredibly high, with far-reaching consequences for Europe and the international order. Understanding the root causes and assigning responsibility is crucial for shaping effective solutions and preventing future conflicts. Ukraine and Russia share a complex and intertwined history, dating back centuries. Despite shared roots, Ukraine has faced repeated attempts by Russia to subsume its identity and autonomy. The Soviet period, particularly the Holodomor, left a deep scar on Ukraine's national psyche. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 presented an opportunity for a new chapter in Ukraine-Russia relations. However, underlying tensions, particularly over Crimea, persisted. The early 21st century witnessed a growing divide between Russia and Ukraine. The 2004 Orange Revolution demonstrated Ukraine's desire for a democratic and European future. Russia, under Putin, viewed these developments with growing alarm. The Euromaidan protests of 2013 to 2014 further exacerbated tensions. These protests escalated into a full-blown revolution, driven by a desire for closer integration with Europe and a rejection of Russian interference. The Euromaidan revolution culminated in the ousting of Yanukovych and the formation of a new pro-Western government in Kyiv. Russia responded with military action, annexing Crimea in March 2014. This annexation was followed by a hybrid war in eastern Ukraine. Russian-backed separatists seized control of parts of the Donbas region. The annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbas marked a turning point in Russia-Ukraine relations. These events set the stage for the 2022 full-scale invasion. NATO, formed in 1949, has been a focal point in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO gradually expanded eastward. Russia views NATO enlargement as a direct threat to its security. This perception has been fueled by NATO military exercises in Eastern Europe. The debate over NATO expansion highlights the divergent perspectives on European security. While the West sees NATO as a defensive alliance, Russia views it as a relic of the Cold War. Ukraine has long aspired to join NATO for security guarantees against Russian aggression. Ukraine's NATO aspirations have been enshrined in its constitution since 2019. Public opinion polls show strong support for NATO membership. However, Ukraine's pursuit of NATO membership has been met with mixed reactions within the alliance. Some NATO members support Ukraine's bid while others are hesitant. Finding a balance between supporting Ukraine's aspirations and managing the risk of escalation has been a major challenge for the alliance. Russia justifies its actions in Ukraine as a response to legitimate security concerns. It argues that NATO expansion and the West's support for pro-democracy movements in Ukraine pose an existential threat. However, many in the West view Russia's security concerns as a pretext for its aggression. They argue that NATO is a defensive alliance and that Russia's actions are driven by expansionist ambitions. The West points to Russia's history of aggression and disregard for international law as evidence of its true motives. The 1994 Budapest Memorandum played a pivotal role in Ukraine's decision to relinquish its nuclear arsenal. Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear stockpile in exchange for security assurances from Russia, the US, and the UK. The memorandum committed the signatories to respect Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. However, Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 raised serious questions about the memorandum's effectiveness. The broken promise of the Budapest Memorandum has had profound implications for international security and arms control. Ukraine's decision to disarm has become a subject of intense debate. Some argue that by giving up its nuclear weapons, Ukraine made itself vulnerable to Russian aggression. However, others argue that attributing Russia's actions solely to Ukraine's lack of nuclear weapons is an oversimplification. They point out that Russia has shown a willingness to use military force even against NATO members. Additionally, maintaining a nuclear arsenal could have led to international isolation and sanctions for Ukraine. Western involvement in Ukraine has been a subject of intense scrutiny and debate. Russia accuses the West of orchestrating the 2014 Euromaidan revolution. The West maintains that its involvement in Ukraine has been focused on promoting democracy and economic development. The leaked phone call between US officials in 2014 added fuel to the debate over Western interference. Despite the accusations, the West has consistently maintained that it respects Ukraine's sovereignty. They have provided support for Ukraine's pro-Western government while emphasizing the need for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Russia's interference in Ukraine has been extensive, aiming to undermine Ukrainian sovereignty and maintain influence. Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, Russia has used economic pressure, political manipulation, disinformation, and military intervention. Economically, Russia has leveraged energy supplies, particularly natural gas, over Ukraine. It has cut off gas supplies during winter, causing hardship and pressuring Ukraine. Russia supports pro-Russian oligarchs and businesses, creating influence networks. Politically, Russia interferes in elections, supports pro-Russian candidates, and spreads disinformation. It supports separatist movements and unrest in Russian-speaking regions. Russia's annexation of Crimea and support for separatists are blatant interference. Military intervention has caused deaths, displacement, and a humanitarian crisis. Russia uses state-controlled media, social media bots, and trolls to spread disinformation. This campaign discredits the Ukrainian government and justifies Russia's actions. Section 3. Information Warfare, the Battle for Hearts and Minds. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has seen unprecedented information warfare, with both sides shaping public opinion. Russia uses state-controlled media like RT and Sputnik to spread pro-Kremlin narratives. Social media platforms amplify disinformation through bots and trolls. Cyber attacks disrupt information flow and sow chaos. The West counters with fact-checking and independent journalism. Yet the volume and sophistication of Russian tactics remain challenging to counter. Section 1. A lifeline of support. Military and economic aid. Since the outbreak of the conflict, Western countries, led by the United States and its NATO allies, have provided Ukraine with a substantial lifeline of military and economic assistance. This support has been crucial in enabling Ukraine to defend itself against Russia's invasion and maintain its resistance against a much larger and better-equipped military force. Military aid has included a wide array of weaponry, from anti-tank missiles and anti-aircraft systems to artillery pieces, ammunition, and intelligence sharing. The US-supplied Javelin anti-tank missiles in particular have gained almost legendary status in the conflict, proving highly effective against Russian tanks and armored vehicles. This steady flow of military equipment has been instrumental in slowing down Russia's advance and inflicting heavy losses on its forces. Beyond military aid, Western countries have also provided Ukraine with billions of dollars in economic assistance to help prop up its economy, which has been devastated by the war. This financial support has been essential in enabling the Ukrainian government to continue functioning, providing basic services to its citizens, and mitigating the economic fallout of the conflict. The European Union has also played a significant role in supporting Ukraine, granting it candidate status for EU membership, a move that has been widely seen as a symbolic victory for Ukraine and a blow to Russia's ambition to keep its neighbor within its sphere of influence. The EU has also imposed unprecedented sanctions on Russia, targeting its economy, financial institutions, and key individuals in an effort to pressure Moscow to end the war. Section 2. The limits of support, balancing assistance and escalation. While Western support has been critical for Ukraine's survival, it has also been a source of tension and debate. Russia has repeatedly warned the West against supplying arms to Ukraine, claiming that it is prolonging the conflict and increasing the risk of a wider war between Russia and NATO. The Kremlin has also accused the West of fighting a proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, using Ukrainian soldiers as pawns in its geopolitical game. Western leaders have been careful to calibrate their support for Ukraine, walking a fine line between providing enough assistance to help it defend itself and avoiding actions that could be perceived by Moscow as escalatory. The Biden administration in particular has ruled out sending U.S. troops to fight in Ukraine or establishing a no-fly zone over the country, recognizing that such moves could trigger a direct military confrontation with Russia, a scenario with potentially catastrophic consequences. This cautious approach reflects the West's awareness of the high stakes involved in the conflict and its determination to avoid a wider war with Russia. However, it has also led to criticism from some quarters that the West is not doing enough to help Ukraine, and that its reluctance to take more decisive action is emboldening Russia. The debate over the level of Western support for Ukraine highlights the complex dilemmas facing policymakers as they grapple with the challenges of this conflict. Balancing the imperative of supporting a democratic country under attack with the need to manage the risk of escalation and avoid a wider war is a delicate balancing act with no easy answers. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is a tragedy of immense proportions, leaving a trail of devastation and displacement in its wake. Assigning blame is a complex task, mired in historical grievances, geopolitical maneuvering, and competing narratives. While the West's role in the events leading up to the conflict is not without its complexities, the weight of evidence points to Russia as the primary aggressor. Russia's actions, including the illegal annexation of Crimea, the instigation of the conflict in the Donbas region, and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, constitute a blatant violation of international law and Ukraine's sovereignty. The arguments presented by Russia, emphasizing NATO expansion and security concerns, ring hollow in the face of its blatant aggression. Security concerns, while legitimate, cannot be used to justify the invasion of a sovereign nation and the infliction of immense suffering on its people. While the West's support for Ukraine, both military and economic, has been essential in enabling Ukraine to defend itself, it has also fueled accusations of fueling the conflict and risking escalation. This delicate balance between supporting Ukraine's right to self-defense and managing the risk of a wider war is a challenge with no easy answers. The international community must continue to pursue diplomatic avenues to find a just and lasting resolution to the conflict. Ultimately, the path to peace in Ukraine requires a recognition of Russia's responsibility for the conflict and its willingness to engage in good faith negotiations. Until then, the world must stand in solidarity with Ukraine, providing the support it needs to defend its sovereignty, rebuild its shattered nation, and hold those responsible for the conflict accountable for their actions.